Our closest relatives genetically are bonobos and chimpanzees, but they differ from each other in many crucial ways in terms of how gender identity and sexuality works in these two species. Would you give a sort of general picture of usual life of average bonobo or chimpanzee with curious examples like chimpanzee Donna?
Yeah. So we have two close relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos. And people often forget about the bonobos. And that is because the chimpanzee was discovered first. It's better known. And the chimpanzee fits with the ideas of major anthropologists. The anthropologists have the idea that humans are so successful because we are aggressive and warriors and male-dominated, and that's how they look at the human species. And the bonobo doesn't fit in that. And the chimpanzee fits very well because chimpanzees can be very violent also in the wild. I always include the bonobo. Genetically, they're exactly equally close to us as the chimpanzee. They are a much more erotic species. They use a lot more sex in their social life. But I would say humans are a very erotic species too, and we often don't even talk about that, but that's absolutely true. And the bonobo is female dominated, and that bothers some people. But, I think that's actually very interesting. And so in the bonobos, the females are collectively dominant over the males. The females are smaller than males, and so individually they cannot dominate the males, but collectively they do. And so the alpha female usually has a clique of other females around her, and together they run the whole group. Chimpanzees are very male-dominated. Every healthy male is dominant over all the females. And they have much more male bonding. The males work together. They are competitive with each other, but they're also very much bonded, and they groom and they travel together, and they defend their territory together, and they can be very violent when they do so. The main source of violence in chimpanzees is violence between groups, not necessarily within the group. That also happens, but between groups. And so they have a very different societies. One is more matriarchal, the other one is more male-dominated. They offer very different visions of us if we compare ourselves with them. And in a gender discussion, it's really, in a way, it's confusing to have them because we don't have a simple picture. We have two quite different close relatives, but it also enriches the discussion, I think. And so, for example, in my discussion of female sexuality, I talk a lot about the bonobos because it's very prominent in them. And the views in biology are very much changing. The way we view female sexuality is changing at the moment.
To what extent is male aggression innate and related to more biological reasons and culture, or how would you estimate approximately?
Well, males are more violent than females, physically violent. And this is true for all human societies. So you look at the murder statistics of any nation, men are going to do more than women. And it's true for all the primates. Females can get violent, and that sometimes happens, and also happens in humans, of course, but the frequency is lower, and the intensity is often lower. So that's a universal difference in all the primates and in all human societies. And I think if you find that kind of things, you have to pay attention, because then biology is most likely involved. But there is variability, of course, also in human societies. There are human societies where violence is extremely low. It's suppressed in the society, and kids are educated not to fight physically, for example. So even with the trait that I think is clearly biological, there is all this cultural variability. That's so interesting about the human species. And I think the same applies to the other primates. We find increasingly how two groups of the same species may be different in their behavior. And so increasingly, we talk about cultural differences in the primates too. So for example, in the chimpanzees, most of the data on lethal aggression, lethal violence in the wild comes from East Africa chimpanzees. West African chimpanzees do much less of that. And we don't know exactly why that is, but it means that the picture that we have of chimpanzees as very violent is maybe a culturally biased picture, because East Africa was the place where Jane Goodall and the Japanese started their field work. And so we have been very much influenced by that image of the chimpanzee. But if you look at chimpanzees in different parts of Africa, you get a different picture.